this afternoon, there's that big question. To turn to the IMF or not? That's the question on the table as President Akufo-Addo is set to begin a crunch meeting with Cabinet today over Ghana's imminent economic crisis. Just in the last 24 hours, fuel prices have skyrocketed, reaching a record 10 cedis per litre. Experts attribute the situation to the free fall of the Ghana cedi. Ghanaians say they can't bear this anymore. Samuel Kujo has the rest of the story on the streets of Accra.
I want to beg the government himself. He said, but the work ministers and this what you want to be that. He said all the thing know that thing, but they don't talk the government right way. The thing they do is bad thing be that. So then they go for the 2 years now for that. Everybody complain for that. It's not good for that.
Because of petrol, won't mean Didi. Won't mean Didi. Inshallah, things be fine. Inshallah. Because of petrol price right now, if you hold how much 5 million, me like that, you no go reach me. You no go reach me. Yeah, I swear you no go reach me.
Me the one of the best say kwa, best say. Ina mind you. Ina to mano. You know, ina mind there. Ina mind there. I'm not there. I'm not pombi. Ina to mano. Nimse bi oba be there. Jan baba. Oba so kurume there. Omia kurume kakama. Omia no. Twi ni me don't kill how me don't kill how I've been on me don't kill how I be on top.
Also, those are some Ghanaians on the streets of Accra complaining. Earlier today, sources closer to the presidency giving us a hint of what the discussion may be about. And as you have there on your screens now, a tweet which we're bringing to you indicating what may be likely on the table as the president goes into that cabinet meeting. But we also do have a breakdown for you of currently how Ghana is faring in terms of our economic needs, and possibly you may want to have an understanding of the figures as we have them on the screens for you coming up shortly, and giving you a picture actually of how much government is on the lookout for in terms of funding, and which is bringing about all of this conversation relating to Ghana's economy. But just as you have it now, we're looking for a certain amount of money, and that money that we're looking for is right on your screens in terms of funding, which government is on the lookout for, heavily reliant on taxation as well. So we can bring you the breakdown. Just have a look at it. 137.5 billion Ghana cedis is what the government of Ghana is on the lookout for, and a significant proportion of that figure that we're talking about is heavily reliant on taxation. As to how government intends to raise that amount, we're not able to tell now, but we know that the deficit as we speak is some 37 and more billion Ghana cedis that government is in dire need for to make up for the already 100.5 billion revenue that is expected. But here's the challenge about the expected revenue. Out of the amount that we're looking for, the tax component of that 100.5 billion, the tax component is 80.2 billion. Now, out of that 80.2 billion, government is targeting some significant amounts of money from the controversial subject of the electronic transactions levy, which is actually becoming a challenge for government in parliament as well. So that's why the president is set to meet on the matter, taking a look at the whole picture and deciding on whether or not they should turn to the IMF or raise funds internally. Minority has been commenting on the matter. Minority in Parliament says Ghana has no option but to turn to the IMF at this point. Kesela Atoforsen is ranking on the Finance Committee in Parliament. Dr. Atoforsen, thank you for joining us on the polls. So here we are. We know that government is about to consider whether or not the nation should go to the IMF or otherwise. Prior to where we are today, you made a call asking government to consider going to the IMF even before now. Has your position changed ever since then?
Thank you very much. And let me add my voice in saying that the government has no choice. Where we find ourselves as a country, there is the need for the government to take a critical decision. The decision may be very difficult to pure, but in the end, it will be in the interest of the country. I'm urging the government to take a decision that will preserve the bright prospect of this country by going to the IMF. I say this for a simple reason, that where the country is heading towards, clearly it looks like we are going to have an accident on the way. Accident in the sense that the way the economy is being run, the levels of our debt, the rate at which inflation is going up, the rate at which that our city is depreciating, and we are losing so much reserves in a very short period of time. Clearly, everything points to an accident that is about to hit us as a country. And I'm urging the government to avert that accident by signing on to an IMF program immediately.
And why sign up on that? Many say this can be dealt with by looking at the local solution. And part of that local solution is the controversy that stares you in the face in Parliament, the need to drive internally generated funds through the e-levy and other mechanisms as well. Why not go for a homegrown approach in dealing with this matter?
Let me say that a homegrown posture or a homegrown program will mean that you have to first show evidence that that homegrown program is going to work. You should indeed have an evidence showing clearly that those policies you are going to put on the table is going to yield some results. Unfortunately, evidence we've seen from 2020, 2021 suggests that government does not have the political will to implement a homegrown policy that will indeed reverse the fiscal imbalances that we are seeing.
I mean, what evidence do you have to back that, particularly when we know, and you've been accused, I'm sure you've heard that you're sabotaging government even when it attempted to make its first move to raise internally generated funds through the e-levy. You've stated your position on the matter. You say it's not the way to go. So it's as though you are tying the hands of government and expecting that something will come out from their policy measures.
Okay. I will deal with the issue of revenue later, but let me first of all address the issue of homegrown.
Okay, then.
The reality is that consistently, this government has been posting a fiscal deficit since 2018 that is obviously not sustainable. That has driven all of us to the ditch, and we've seen debt growing at a level that is not acceptable. Today, our public debt, I'm sure the central bank is about to announce it, but the fact is our public debt has exceeded 80%. In fact, from my mathematics, the numbers that I have seen and I've worked it out, the Public Debt Plus Energy Sector Levies Act, the amount that we have borrowed on the back of the ESLA bonds and the Sino Hydro will give you approximately 83% of our GDP, per the evidence that I have seen. I can also confirm to you that by the end of December this year, I will not be surprised to see the debt stock increasing to a level that is unprecedented in our history, in the region of about 90%.
But at that's not new. That's not new. The accusation is that you started it off. We crossed the 70% threshold under the John Mahama regime. So the issue of debt is not particularly new to this administration.
But can I correct you that after the rebasing, our debt to GDP before when President Mahama was leaving office was 56%. And also to correct you that since the Fourth Republic, it's only this government that is taking our public debt to about 90% of GDP. Our debt has been increasing at an increasing, very important to you. I've consistently heard members of this administration pointing to the fact that the obvious solution would be the passage of the e-levy or revenue. But let me say that I disagree with them 100% on this one. Because, in fact, investors will respond positively if government decide to cut expenditure than necessary raising revenue. So they are getting it wrong. What I see wrong with this administration is the fact that they are not appreciating the magnitude of the problems that we face in this economy. Our economy is in deep trouble, and I can predict to you that if they fail to take the risk to take us to an IMF,
it's not as though we've not seen the IMF conditionalities before. Government is in fact told us the implications of that. That's not something that they should be telling us. It's quite obvious that when we go to the IMF, there'll be, and just hold on for me briefly, there'll be a number of restrictions on government in terms of expenditure and some of the policy measures. That would be really biting, isn't it?
But what is the trade-off? The trade-offs will mean the economy will collapse on us. So we are confronted with two scenarios. Scenario one, go to an IMF, obviously endure the conditionalities for a couple of years and get your economy on track. Or scenario two, wait until your economy collapses completely to the level that will bring social tension on the street and if charge a price for it. If I'm given the opportunity to choose, I will advise the government to take the first scenario. Go to an IMF program. You won't be the first government ever to go into an IMF program. Successive government has taken Ghana to an IMF program. In fact, President Rawlings took Ghana to an IMF program. In fact, President Kufuor did the same. President Mills did it. President Mahama has done it. And so I do not understand the policy of this administration as if IMF is a monster.
But if you're asking for the policy of this government, if you're asking for the policy of this government, the government says it's running a Ghana beyond aid. I'm sure that you've heard that as well.
A Ghana beyond aid that has gone to the market and borrowed so much money. I would have thought that a government beyond aid will be a government that is not borrowing so much. The leader of COVID obviously asked the IMF to give them 2 billion Ghana cedis, the very IMF that you are bastardizing today. The World Bank is giving you money. In fact, before COVID, you've been taking money left, right, and center from everyone else. So what are we talking about? What is important for us to do today is for us to preserve the bright prospect of this country. And not for one political party to think that because I want to preserve my tradition, I want to obviously, win elections. So I'm taking decisions that will run the country into a ditch. We will not accept that as a position.
We need to go.
We ask them to do what is wrong.
Right. We need to go. We have just a minute. There's a cabinet meeting, as we understand, underway to consider the options. What's your simple message to the president on this?
My message to His Excellency, the President of the Republic, is for him to take a decision that is right and will preserve the bright future of our country. Our country is obviously in a big mess. Excuse my French, our country's economy is in a deep shape. That is the fact. It is for the President to take a decision that will be in the interest of the country. I acknowledge that it will come with some conditionalities, but it's worthwhile, because the trade-off will mean that in the course of the year, Ghana may end up limping to the IMF program in an ambulance. And if care is not taken, that will spark social tension. So you should go and choose the right option, an option that will preserve the country's future. That is what he's been elected to do.
Dr. Forson, thank you so much for joining us on The Pulse. And so there you have it, the position of minority on this matter, asking government to consider an IMF conditionality. But are we ready for that? And what are the other avenues available to government as we speak? Joining us now via Zoom is Courage Buti, an economist, helping us to understand all of this. Courage, you've seen the arguments from government indicating that we have an alternative, even if we don't go to the IMF. But minority says it's inevitable. What's your analysis of all that's been happening?
Well, good afternoon to your listeners. Good afternoon to your listeners. I believe you can hear me, right?
Yes, loud and clear. Right.
Yeah. So let me just start on this light note. It's not too difficult to understand why both parties are arguing the way they are arguing. NPP, before they came to government, made IMF look like that monster whom you don't want to associate with. In fact, the NDCs claim that they went to the IMF between 2014 and then where we ended to claim policy credibility was one item they mocked so much during the campaign period, and then bringing them now to government. And then so I think it's only fair to say, in keeping with their position, that going to IMF will make mockery of whatever it was said previously about the IMF. Really, that is one thing. On the other hand,
I'm sorry, is it really an issue of political points as we speak, when we know that government is obviously concerned about the average Ghanaian who are feeling the pinch of what's happening to the economy?
Well, it's just my preliminary point, really. I would actually state my opinion on this, but I'm just trying to say that it's not hard to see why both parties are arguing the way they are arguing. On the NDC side, you made them lose power because you bastardized them. You made Ghanaians believe that these things are not good and all of that. And so if you go to IMF now, I have every reason to hold you to it, and then tell Ghanaians why you are not better managers of the economy after all. and that you also need IMF much as I do, and it will have consequence for the political game, I believe, in 2024. I believe it's a reason, even not that is the whole fact, it might be part of why the arguments are going they are going. But that said, I don't think it's an argument of either or, whether do we go to the IMF or not. I think where we are now, we must admit, for every well-reasoning Ghanaian and analyst worth its salt must admit that we are in the situation we are partly because of the shocks of COVID, and it's not exclusive to Ghana. And of course, you can admit some mismanagement and some wrong decisions here and there. But chiefly, we are where we are because of the ravages of COVID and all of that. If we are trying to solve it, the immediate problem is that we've lacked access to the international capital market, and the domestic capital market is not deep enough to provide the resource needs to finance the deficit for 2022 and then the other things we need to do, right? And so the question again is, what will going to IMF do for you? Going to IMF at this point in time gives you that credibility and then probably potentially give you access back to the market. Because once IMF comes to town, the investor community are short of discipline. They are short of you keeping to the fiscal target. They are short of you cutting away wastages. And those are the things they need to reassure them to want to look at your bonds again. The CD is reeling, and then rightly so, because droves of offshore investors are moving out of our economy. They do not see prospects. And then we can't see access to the international capital market, where usually we go early in the year to get on Eurobonds to shore our reserves, the reason we've always supported the CD all through this period. So going to IMF at this point gives you access back to that market, where the investors are sure that we have our big brother in town who will make sure these guys behave, and so we can start looking at them. That is one side. But that doesn't rule out the fact that we need to look for domestic sources of raising revenue. IMF gives you maximum. The last program we went to, it's about 980 million or so. Now our quota has increased somehow. So give or take, you are getting about between 1.3 or 1.5 billion. Multiply that by today's exchange rate, and it is just a little under or just close to the amount we want to raise from e-levy alone. And that is for that money. If the program is 3 years, it will be split between 3 years, really. So you are not having 1 billion or 1.5 billion.
But I guess it's just not about the funding that we're getting from the IMF. You talk about credibility on the market and all of that. These are issues that, for instance, Fitch talks about. Fitch says if we need that credibility in terms of going out there to seek for external funding, we'll need that credibility support from the IMF. So it goes way beyond the amount in terms of the collective that we're looking at comparatively to the e-levy, isn't it?
Exactly my point, and that's why I'm saying it's not an either-or situation, really.
Right.
We need to look at both, because going to IMF has immediate returns, but in terms of money, and I'm countering government position that we can raise the money from within, and so if you are raising the money from within, the local market is not able to give you enough. You want taxes.
Courage, if you're still with us. Courage, we're also trying to look at this aspect of how much more time we have. Courage, are you still there with us? We appear to be having some challenges there, but Courage will join us to look at the aspect that we want to also explore, the issue about how much more time government has on its hands to deal with this matter in terms of the e-levy, because that's the alternative that government is eyeing. And he's just brought us a perspective indicating that if we're able to work on the e-levy, that may deal with the funding gap that we're looking for from the likes of the IMF. We'll get back to that shortly.